This is the story of how the most famous dancer that England has ever produced was deceived and betrayed by those closest to her, of how a little girl called Peggy Hookham, brought up in Shanghai, told her mother that she would one day become the greatest dancer in the world, and of how, in spite of being almost unable to walk, she was still performing when she was 67. It is a story of courage and tenacity, of unbelievable devotion to her art and to those whom she loved, who, in the end, left her penniless and alone, even to the extent that she was buried at first in a pauper's grave. It is the stuff of fiction, except that it is true.
Even in my remote corner of wilderness in Canada, she was a household name. She was on everyone's tea biscuit tin and all that sort of thing. I mean, she really was. She was a big name. She was as big a name as the Prime Minister of England, if not more, you know. She was up there with Churchill. In my remote little dot on the globe. So what she must have been here and loved and adored, she was a household word, you know. She represented ballet. She was ballerina. She was. Fonteyn was ballerina. That was ballerina.
She had very bad judgment about people. She definitely had bad judgment about people. Yes, that was a weakness. And therefore, a lot of people used her, exploited her, cheated her. But I think she didn't have very good taste in people. If you really wanted to know, that rather separated her and me. I couldn't quite face all the creeps.
I know that she was having injections in her feet for the last few years when I was there because the arthritis was so bad. And Fred used to, you know, Margot would run across the stage and he'd say, "Margot, stop beetle crushing. Use your feet through the floor," you know. And it was too painful.
She was like the Queen. She represented England. She was it. She was the face of the motherland. She was a true heroine. You identified with her. I mean, as a dancer or even as a member of the audience, you just identified with the fact that this woman was there, sort of doing it for you. That was the ability. That was the quality that she had. That she was dancing in your place. That if you could dance, that was what you would do, and she would embody it for you.
Well, she had one knee which hurt every time she bent it. And I only found that out because I said to her, "Why do you always take your curtains on that leg?" She said, "Because every time I move on the other leg, it sends a shooting pain." And you'd come into the dressing room sometimes and she'd be taking off her shoes. And she'd take off the shoes and her feet were covered in blood because no matter how often you do things, every now and then, if you're a dancer, your feet bleed. But she would always, I mean, I suppose I was privileged that she felt she could take them off when I was in the dressing room. But if other people came in and her stockings were splattered with blood, she would hide her feet under the table so they didn't see.
she was an invention, really, Margot. The making of Margot is the most extraordinary thing. She was a pudgy little girl, a plump little thing, with a basin haircut. Did look a bit Chinese. She had her nose changed, and she found that there was a kind of glamour to dances that she felt that she needed. She had a very low hairline, and so when she pulled her hair back, she used to pluck the hair round her forehead to take her hairline back, to give her better line. She dyed her hair. But many dancers dye their hair. That's except that in those days there was a sort of prejudice that you absolutely had to have black hair if you were going to be a dancer.
She wanted a long neck, and she did achieve it. You know how she held her neck, her head beautifully. It was absolutely. But if you see the pictures, she was a little girl. She didn't have a specially long neck, but she made herself into what she wanted to be.
When she opened her mouth, it was dreadful. She had a voice like this. It was really... And sometimes she had to talk when they were doing an old interview. And then she realised too, she said, my voice is terrible, isn't it? So she went and had special voice lessons.
She was like a blank page. She was something that people could write on. She was like somebody in a cocoon, actually. She was like somebody coming out of chrysalis into this haunted, beautiful, bony face, came out of this really unpromising material. Almost as unpromising as her name, really.
When it came to getting on stage, I also thought it was Hookham isn't a good stage name. And, we changed it to Fonteyn. Well, my maiden name was Fontes, and that was the nearest we could get to it. I didn't want it to be too foreign.
Everybody thinks that the name Fonteyn is very wonderful and wonderfully chosen and all the rest of it. I would have to say that the facts are that it was chosen just because it came after another name in a telephone book. And I think it was a hairdresser's in the Charing Cross Road who supplied the magic, because when the letter came back from the Fontes family saying on no account will we let our name be besmirched by theatrical associations, Margot and her mother then went back to the telephone directory and looked down the F's, and lo and behold there was a hairdresser in the Charing Cross Road, Fonteyn, and they said, right, that will do.
The first house that I can remember was in the London suburb of Ealing. And there we were a happy, ordinary little family of four with my father and mother and my brother Felix, 3 years older than me.
Her mother was illegitimate and had grown up without any experience of mothering, of being mothered, and was pretty alarmed when she had children of her own. This is BQ, Hilda Hookham, to the extent that she actually tried to abort Margot when she was pregnant with her by throwing herself down the steps and taking strange potions that she read about in books. And luckily she didn't succeed, because I think, to be illegitimate in the early part of the last century, you would have been vilified. And it was certainly kept a dark family secret all through Margot's life. It never appeared in the press because she'd been illegitimate. I think it was the mother's sense of really having no existence, of not being an authentic person with an authentic name, made her put all her energy into Margot's life. So I think that there wasn't room in Margot's life because she was so busy living her life for her mother. There wasn't enough room for her to move on into the state of motherhood. And interestingly, Margot died only 2 years after her mother. Her mother lived for her entire life. If Margot was married to anyone in the world, she was married to her mother. They were a complete double act.
Well, originally, I think my husband said something about deportment classes. Well, of course, in those days, we didn't think anything about that sort of dancing. But anyway, there was a dancing teacher just near, and I took her there, and I liked watching children, particularly since my own child moved more gracefully than most. As a small child of about 4, she had one of those kiddie car things, and it ran away down a hill, and she fell off at the bottom, and she bellowed. Windows flew open, doors flew open. Somebody said, "Oh, would you like to bring the little girl in?" So I said, "Oh, yes, I will," because she was, her knees were bleeding. And she took us to the cloakroom and we mopped her up. And then we sat in the drawing room. And the moment she got in that drawing room, you could see her controlling herself. Great big sobs. But she controlled herself, even at that age, without any saying from me. So she's got an inborn natural control.
Father had been working in London. He used to have an office overlooking St. James's Park, and when I was very tiny, I used to go up to his office and look out across the park. And when he was at Manchester University, he met my mother, who was actually half Brazilian, but had never been to Brazil in her life because she was born and brought up in Manchester.
At the great age of 6, with a few dancing lessons behind me, I thought that I could do my favourite dance pretty well, the Irish washerwoman's jig. I was 8 when this happy family existence came to an end, because my father accepted a position with the British American Tobacco Company to be chief engineer for their whole China division. And for a variety of reasons, we were in fact never again to live together as a family of 4. We arrived finally at Shanghai, and the ship moored up in midstream of the Wangpu River opposite the famous Shanghai waterfront, the Bund. That must have been early 1928.
Margot, I met in Shanghai when she was 7. It was spitting everywhere. There were beggars everywhere. And my first memory was seeing a man in a faraway field cutting his child's leg to make him a beggar. Terrible, terrible. I thought Margot would die. She had no bones. Like Anglo-Saxons, we all have bones. Stick out. Margot floated. We called her the little black cat. She's always remained the little black cat to me. She was a little waft movement, very quiet, very reserved, came to life when she danced.
When I was 14, my mother brought me back to England because she thought that if I had any talent for dancing, it was time that she took me somewhere to professional company, if possible, to see if I had any chances.
She brought me to the Pheasantry in the King's Road, Chelsea, where the Princess Serafine Astafieva, a famous ballerina from Imperial Russia, had her dancing school.
And so my mother arrived and said, "I want you to take my daughter for ballet classes." And Astafieva, she was rather old and sad and tired at that time. And she said, "No, I don't want to take any more pupils." She said, "I've had many pupils, but they've grown up and they've gone away and they don't come to see me very often, and I don't want to have more pupils." So my mother stood her ground there and she said, She said, well, I've come all the way from Shanghai just to bring my daughter to you. You've got to take her.
Previously, I really didn't like ballet dancing very much because it was rather stiff and rigid and frankly boring. And I liked something where I was banging a tambourine and stamping about in heeled shoes. I loved that kind of thing, rhythm and movement and everything. But I didn't stop to think of my mother's special problem, which was, should she stay with me in London and try to advance me with my dancing? Or if I really wasn't worth it and didn't have any talent, we would go back to Shanghai and continue our life there. So my mother felt well fine in a dancing school, but she has to get a real assessment, and she took me to audition at the Sadler's Wells Theatre. That was the school for the then Vic Wells Ballet, a young company which much later became Britain's Royal Ballet. And its founder was Ninette de Valois, the presiding genius of British ballet.
She was terrifying, you know, she would shout and stamp and get frightfully cross. I mean, she would even tell Margot off. I remember Margot was doing Swan Lake. Margot had gone on for her first entrance, and then you come off and there's a little gap before you go on and do the pas de deux. And she said, your hair's not right, and she ripped her headdress off and sort of put it all back on as she thought it would be right. You know, Margot accepted it and went on as cool as a cucumber.
But it is a fact, if you look back on your life, anyone in my position who's looking for talent or special people, there's certain people stand out. But I do remember walking into the Sadler's Wells rooms. There was class going on. I saw a little girl, wasn't more than 14 or 15. I remember crossing the room. She just hit me between the eyes like that. I can even tell you the exercise she was doing.
And there appeared in a corner a little girl, as we looked at her then. I was only about 15 myself, and she was 2 or 3 years younger, so she really was a little girl with black hair and a fringe, short cut to the ears. And we all looked at her and watched her work. And a bit of whispering went on, because she really was beautiful.
The first time that I ever came in contact with Margot Fonteyn must have been in 1933 or 34. I didn't get on with her, and I found her inadequate in what she was doing. And also, she seemed to me to have a sort of superior attitude, which didn't appeal to me. And also, sort of, I sensed a kind of streak of stubbornness. She was rather sort of, as I used to say to her, your feet are rather buttery. And so I bullied and bullied and bullied her, and she got more into a state, and then finally she burst into tears and rushed up and put her arms around me and said, I'm sorry, but I'm trying my very best, and I can't do any more.
I think we fed each other tremendously, and I mean, I always enjoyed working with her, and I think she enjoyed working with me, and we developed each other, I think, in the course of the thing. I mean, I taught her a great deal, and she also enriched me.
Fred certainly needed somebody that he could mould and eventually shape into a muse. His toy, if you like. He was going to create something, and she was the plasticine, she was the terracotta, his thumbprint on that basic lump of clay. And after a rocky start, when she felt that she couldn't understand anything that he wanted, very soon she said, you are in charge. If he saw her picking up a cigarette in the early days, he would snap it out of her hand and say, ballerinas don't smoke. And that was how it was, and it was a very profound relationship.
The principal dancer at Sadler's Wells Theatre was Robert Helpman, who was a man of the theatre if ever there was. If he was on the stage, nobody was going to look at me. So this was the best training I could possibly have had to become a real artist of the ballet, not just a dancer. This amateur film of Giselle, in which I'm dancing with Robert Helpman, was taken during a performance at Sadler's Wells Theatre in 1937.
I'd seen Fonteyn in the classroom, and in fact she had played my son in a ballet called The Haunted Ballroom. And I'd not taken much notice of her. She was a leggy little girl with very intense black eyes. And when de Valois told me that this was to be my new partner, I must admit that I had certain fears until this child started to dance, and she had this curious quality of making one want to cry, even if she was doing something funny. Our partnership was perhaps one of the most extraordinary experiences in my life, because I danced with Fonteyn for 25 years. And I don't suppose for the first 9 or 10 of those years I ever spoke to her at all, outside the rehearsal room or the dressing room. I'd say good night, what time's the rehearsal in the morning, but I never spoke to her. I think it was because I thought she was standoffish, and she thought that I was standoffish.
Then we had this really superb musical director, Constant Lambert.
Constant Lambert was one of the greatest influences on Fonteyn's life. He developed her taste not only in paintings but in literature, as he indeed did with mine.
Constant had an eye for the ladies, and he was out and about all the time, it seems. Unfortunately, he was a very, very heavy drinker. I mean, there's a wonderful story told about Constant when he was conducting Sleeping Beauty here one night. When he got staggered onto the podium, he turned to the concert master and he said, "I think when the pas de trois becomes the pas de six, it's time for me to go home." And how Margot, who was this rather sheltered girl, suddenly fell into the hands of this real bohemian who led a pretty rough sort of life one way or another.
So I said, well, what made him such a good conductor? And Ashton said, very good tempi, very good ear, very good sense of balance, very large cock, all in a sort of stream of equally valued things. And I can remember looking at the pictures of Constant, looking like a kind of ash heap. I mean, really quite disgusting, actually, and with sort of food down himself, and the stories about him falling over drunk, and you see this colossally bloated pastiche Churchill figure in at least one cigarette in his mouth, if not several. Trying to put that in my mind next to the immaculate, young, fawn-like Margot Fonteyn, and really puzzling over how it had worked. She, with the absent father always in her life, was so welcoming to the idea of somebody who was on the Constant model, and my God, knew so much, and must have been fantastic to do all to such good fun.
She did have 2 abortions when she was young, and one presumes they were Constant's children. That weird thing of being in a company and knowing that this person had huge power to wield, and wanted her sexually, and I think she was frightened and didn't quite know what to do. Her mother was certainly thoroughly alarmed. Constant put an enormous amount of pressure on her, to which she eventually succumbed. And it sort of set the tone for all Margot's relationships, which were all with difficult men. The difficulty of Constant was that he was diabetic, so that drinking made him not just drunk but ill. So, she had a terribly hard time with him physically, and I mean, that can't have been, she was forever worrying and fretting about him. But the thing about abortion in those days in the company, the worst thing you could do really was have a baby, because dancers just didn't have children. You made a decision. Were you going to dance or were you going to develop your maternal side? And there was no question that your entire, like a nunnery, you had to go in there and you had to absolutely cast out all thought of leading a double life.
People were reluctant to talk about their relationship, was that she was probably, strictly speaking, underage, and this may not have looked very good when it was brought out into the light of day. Dancers particularly would not talk about it. In fact, several of them, if I mention the subject, got distinctly ratty about it. Michael Soames, I can remember saying, "If I see anything about Margot in your book, I will throw the book, on the fire and stoke it."
He actually once went to her flat, and there she was on the floor with all these books that Constant had given her, ripping out the pages that Constant had signed. And that, I know that upset Michael a lot, and he just couldn't believe what he was seeing. But she did. She tried to destroy every bit of evidence, I think.
So it has something to do with, not just with her youth, but with her underagedness. Shame and problems to do with that, embarrassment, shame and problems to do with that. And much more to do with how hurt she must have felt, having given so much when he turned away and got married to somebody else. I mean, that's a pattern of behaviour that we can see all sorts of people repeating. But she had a very, very, very bad case of it, so bad that she even cut him out of her autobiography as a professional figure, let alone as a personal one.
One day I was in the dressing room arguing an artistic point, and I said, but Constant would have done it this way, whatever the point was. And immediately Margot's face, which I had been talking to her in the mirror, she swung around with panic written all over her face, said, oh, no, 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 you don't understand, no, it's not that. She was stricken. She'd actually been stood up at a registry office by Constant. I guess she was traumatized by the whole relationship and decided in her wonderful way that goes into the box with the key that you throw away.
They were supposed to meet at a church, and it was going to happen, and he didn't turn up. The idea that somebody else married him was a terrible blow to Margot. Went very hard with her. And she really, in Ashton's words, cut the idea of him completely out of her life and sewed herself up and became a virgin again, is what Ashton said. You know, it was a very, very harsh thing for her to find that, you know, that somebody else had taken Constant from her.
She was longing to give all her love to somebody, unconditional love to somebody. That must have been a very profound need in Margot. I suppose she'd received so much love, but what she'd wanted to do was to give it. She'd received so much, I don't mean from the public, you know. Always been adored by everyone, but actually what she wanted to do was to give it.
Yeah, I suppose she probably never really had the love she would have loved. It is sad. You're going to make me cry if I start thinking about it now, even more, but it is a very... She had a fulfilling life in many ways, but you very often get control freaks in the theatre who need to keep you in your place, because if you allowed that person to fly in their own right, it would go beyond your wildest dreams. I never saw her with a really close friend when we used to go night clubbing after performance or dancing or partying and things. She was just like sometimes a child about Christmas. You know, she was just having so much fun. And she knew we all knew we should be in bed and resting our feet for the next day's double performance. But, you know, life's also got to be lived. And I think that was also part of the loneliness. It comes with the territory. Our ballet career, it's a short physical career, and when you're in like pop stars, and when you're out, and that's it. But in between, the soul of the person has to live, and some people are strong enough, as with the pop world, some are strong enough to survive, and others just turn to drugs or drink or just fall apart, or feel as though they're on the scrappy.
When the war broke out, we were in Arnhem, guns started, and the Germans started coming down, leaping out of their aeroplanes onto the ground. We could see these black objects coming down and landing all around us.
in the first interval, they came and said, I don't think you ought to stay after the performance for supper. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, there's been an incident on the board. It's nothing. And the next interval, they said, how quickly can you all get in the coaches?
Well, the Germans invaded, so we had to leave quickly. It did take about 3 days before we got back to England. The whole invasion only took 4 days, so it was quite a narrow escape.
We spent a day in a kind of, like a country club. And there we were, and I remember there were lots of old girls there, and they were all looking for a fourth for bridge the whole time. This was all they were wearing, with the guns going in the distance and everything. And they were always looking for a fourth hand for bridge.
Suddenly the door burst open, and they said, the buses are here, women only. And Ninette said, then none of us go. She said, I'd rather take the boys and leave the women, because the boys will suffer most. So unless it's all, then we all stay.
But we had to leave everything behind us. And there was 7 years' work tied up there. All our famous English scores were lost. We couldn't get them out. All our scenery, all our costumes.
We had to get out. We did, squeeze out. The last boat that left Holland had us on it. And we went down a ladder, and this was just the bare boards of a boat. And we curled up in a corner like this on shore like animals. We landed in Harwich. They said, oh, you can't land here. Your paper's on for Harwich.
The men were called up, but the women were excused being called up, providing we gave 6 weeks' performances to the troops a year, in Ensa, as it was called. So we used to dance in hangars, and we used to go to the army camps, and we had a feeling of being part of the war effort. You went into dingy old assembly halls or church halls with uneven floors and cold and smelling of coke, fumes, and we never had a holiday. After the show Saturday, it was a question of an overnight in the train, and we would sleep either on the luggage racks or put the cases between the seats and put our legs across that way.
The audiences came to enjoy the ballet tremendously, I suppose because it was such a complete contrast to the dismal depression and dreariness and horror of life outside the theatre. We were working in small theatres in the provinces where there was very intimate contact between the audience and the dancers, and we had more acting ballets at that time, which were very good in the small theatre and had a tremendous impact.
Our basic diet was sausages, really. Sausages and potatoes. And in the digs, they were very naughty. You know, the landladies, we felt at least, maybe they weren't, but we felt that they pinched our butter, and we had 2 ounces of butter a week and 2 ounces of margarine.
We never knew what it was to have an empty house anywhere. Gradually, this enormous public grew, because people really hadn't cars, they had very little food, they had no clothes. There was nothing to spend their money on but theatre. And you never could get in. I mean, it was almost impossible to get into a theatre. It was fantastic success. Tito did the ballet an awful lot of good, the war.
When the war ended, it was decided to move Sadler's Wells Ballet to Covent Garden, then under its new director, David Webster.
It was a dance hall during the war, and that was sort of very exciting to think it was going to be an opera house full-time. Which had never happened before. It was only open for seasons before the war.
I said to Ninette, we must absolutely at all costs go there.
We were all absolutely horrified at the size of the stage after the ones we'd been used to.
If we'd gone back to a smaller theatre, we'd have been a smaller company. By being in a great opera house like that, the thing had to expand, had to grow. If you suddenly inherited a big house, you have to have the right furniture to go with it.
I think the most telling thing for me was going to Covent Garden and to slowly watch them bring the plush seats up from the basement where they were under the floor there and put them back in their place. It was a fantastic thing to watch this happening. I can remember even when we first opened, the excitement one night in the gallery when a rat ran across the centre of the seats there. Ooh, it was very grim.
Beauty, which opened the theatre on February the 20th, 1946, designed by Messel, was one of the most successful productions we've ever done. Especially invited audience came to the first performance, led by the King and Queen and the princesses and Queen Mother, Queen Mary. When Queen Mary arrived, she was conducted upstairs by Sir David Webster to the royal anteroom, and she gave one piercing look round it and said, "What, no food?" That night was the most difficult, because nothing except what you could see existed in the theatre.
I think when we moved to the Opera House for the Sleeping Beauty, I think we all felt we had to change our style considerably. But I think the one who thought most about it was Margot Fonteyn. And I think she studied the theatre. She spoke to people who'd seen dancers dancing there before the war. She went into the whole question very thoroughly. She got over to every seat in the house. And that's what they always loved about her.
Nobody had the clothes to be very grand. I mean, they brought out all their old evening dresses and things, and everyone did whatever they could to dress up. But I always said it was a girl that smelled strongly of mothballs, because no one had worn anything like that for so long.
Never forget Margot's physical allure was something so extraordinary, and even just the running was sheer magic. Her ability to stand on point and hold that position, and you were sort of gasping, as I'm sure the dancers must have been too, about how long she was going to stay up, because they weren't quite close enough for her to put her hand out for support, because that's what she did not want. She wanted them to be far enough away to give her the opportunity to show how she could stand on point like that. And it was absolutely extraordinary.
And she did her releves and releve and held a balance. And releve and releve, held a balance. Releve and releve, held the balance. And not distorting the music, but she just held the balance. And the audience held its breath.
was doing leads on £4 a week. And then it went up to £4.50. And even at Covent Garden, Moira Shearer and I went in at £10 a week, and we had to fight to be raised to £15 a week. Between Webster and Ninette, one sent you to the other. Oh, yes, we weren't paid.
Margot was really one of the most important person in my life, and I can say it because it's true and it's deep. And I'm very proud of it because I had seduced one of the greatest artists I ever known. We were young, both of us. She had maybe a few years more than I, but not much. And then we were walking by the Seine in Paris. And then we went down and walked down close to the river. And I said, "Oh, I would like to swim." I never swim in the Seine because it's dirty, you know. I mean, you don't swim in the Seine. No, I said, I think I will go and swim in the Seine. I started to undress and I see Margot. And I saw Margot undressing, and I did boom, and she did boom in the water. And we went on the other side swimming, and we came back thinking, we hope that nobody stole our clothes, because we weren't, both of us, naked.
I was just the person at the right moment who opened the door. She was flying by her own, away from all the people around her at Covent Garden who were making the law, and were like this on her. They thought they were owning her. And she escaped, and suddenly she was in Paris with a young dancer, and she had fun. She was laughing, she was laughing so much, and suddenly she was somebody else. I opened the door. We went in many nightclubs, you know, after the war, these places on the left bank where all the young celebrities and the old one too, everybody was there. And I went in a few of them with Margot, and we were dancing like mad. You know, what was the music à la mode at that time? It was not the rock, it was before the rock. I found a letter a few days ago in my bedroom, a letter. She says that to me. She says, you know, I owe you something very important. It's that after I worked with you, I felt free. She just decided that was another way of living, so she was suddenly dressed like the most elegant woman.
She always looked immaculate. I mean, you never saw her in a pair of jeans, or sneakers or anything like that. Heels and gloves and hats and Dior suits, and always perfectly groomed. Hair always terribly tidy in a chignon, not like today, not all over the place. Nothing wrong with it, but, she was immaculate. And we were all sort of, thought, God, that's what a ballerina is all about.
At the time of the first Royal Ballet visit to America in 1949, the dancers were beginning to be seen by the haute couture as good vehicles for their fashion, being ambassadors for Britain. All the girls, all the men had to be impeccably dressed. And there were one or two members of the company, like Leslie Edwards, for example, who would check everybody and say, well, look, you look awful, change that, get your hair different, and just things like that. And it was all part of this ballet image.
Hurok didn't want me to take it. He only wanted me to take one act. He said America would never stand for a full-length ballet at that time. I said we either take it as a whole or not at all.
Personally, I was terrified. I had this long attack of stage fright, which really lasted for 3 months. And journalists who tried to interview me in New York when we arrived there found me absolutely mute. I was so frightened I couldn't say anything. I was so sure of failure. I thought, this is going to be terrible, and I'm going to let down the whole company and Ninette de Valois, and it's going to be a ghastly thing. And I was so stunned because I was by then totally convinced that I was going to be a disaster, and it was just so much the reverse.
She must have felt
that the entire prestige of Great Britain was resting on her tiny shoulders. This was before the Beatles invasion, when Britain was almost a defeated country. And it had come out of the war in a very depleted state, almost in reputation. And I think that although America must have been happy to greet the plucky little English kids, on the other hand, there was a certain feeling that the English weren't particularly very good at the arts anyway. I mean, you know, you didn't have English musicians, you didn't have it. The idea of the English dancing must have been a rather peculiar idea.
I remember especially that night in America of The Sleeping Beauty because the audience went wild. And I remember after one variation that she did, a man in a box nearly fell out. He was so excited. And New York was at her feet. And she couldn't believe it, really. We could.
We were all standing in the wings. I was a knitting lady in the first act of Sleeping Beauty, and so we all stood in the wings, and I think everybody was crying. And we had never seen Margot dancing like that. Never. Also, the audience reaction, which was very surprising to us. You know, the American habit of clapping in the middle of... You know, English audiences don't do that. They wait until the very end. But all of a sudden, you know, there's all this applause in the middle. She got into an arabesque or into a great balance in attitude. And there was this huge amount of applause.
Nobody knew what they were going to see that night. And when she ran on not as a ballerina at all. She did run on as a very happy 16-year-old. There were none of the great presentations that a ballerina might be expected to make. She hurtled onto the stage, smiling from ear to ear, went at it with apparently total joy. And before it was even a third of the way in, the mayor of the city leaned around the post to Ninette de Valois and said, "You're in, lady."
And she came to the famous Rose Adagio where the princess balances on the hand of all the princes. And when she came to the third prince, she'd caught such a miraculous balance that she didn't even take his hand. She just smiled at him. Well, I thought the audience would explode. And in that one miraculous balance, Fonteyn created the great reputation of the English ballet.
Was very, very important to us at that period. And of course, this incredible reception she got when we first took her to America turned her into the international star ballerina of England. And she had an international name overnight. Particularly during the first very difficult years when the subsidy was so small, the only thing that had any possibility of making money was the ballet, and most certainly our first 10 years in the States and the dollars we brought back here were of tremendous importance to this opera house on a very big scale. In fact, the nickname we got after the first season was not the ballerinas, but the dollarinas, they were called. It shows you the dollars must have been pouring in at that time.
I knew she'd be a wonderful dancer and a ballerina, naturally. That was the word we used then for a few dancers, a ballerina, and we knew that. But I didn't know that she'd conquer the world
I was simply dumbfounded by it. First was when the magazines Time and Newsweek both came out in editions with my picture on the cover. I thought that was something that only happened to heads of state or something.
Margot is one of those things that may not happen again for a very long time. There are very few such artists spring up in any company. Go to Russia, you will see exactly the same thing. We should have to be patient before we have another Margot Fonteyn.
We had our own train with Fabulous Rose Ballet written across it.
Which used to trundle us all the way over and all the way back and became home, rather like a circus. I used to get quite sad at leaving it. I mean, I can even remember the name of my sleeping coach. It was called Fort Wayne or something. I got so fond of Fort Wayne.
I used to share a bunk with Moira Shearer. And sometimes she would be up and I would be down. Sometimes she would be down and I'd go up. The orchestra seemed to be very happy playing chess all the time. I tried to sleep and couldn't sleep on the train. I tried sleeping tablets and they made no difference whatsoever, so I gave those up. They just made me feel awful in the day.
When we toured in America on very, very long tours, 5 months, 16, 20 one-night stands, where we really lived on the train, and I can't remember how we ever did our washing. We had to get off the train by sort of 8:30 or something like that in the morning. But we got off at 8:30 with the seams in our stockings exactly straight. You know, it was before jeans and T-shirts, so nothing about our appearance was casual. It was so formal. And Margot, of course, was, you know, the leader of this very formal brigade. I remember having gloves with me. I think we managed to ditch the hats somewhere along the line. But in the little room adjacent to the loo, we all struggled to keep our balance and get our stockings straight. When the train's moving, to be the leader of a company in her 20s was very, very difficult. But it was much harder in her 30s and harder in her 40s because she had such an enormous reputation to live up to all the time. And I think that people expected so much from her because she was mostly flawless. And I would have thought that it was extremely difficult for her. I used to stand quite near her on the bar. And if I think about it now, I mean, I can see the texture of her skin. I can see the colour pink that her practice clothes were. I can see the shape of her arm in front of me and how her hair was done. She was just, I think, so completely disciplined. And then she had this wonderful sense of humour. She was funny. She could go from leaning over the bar, roaring with laughter, giggling away, and in a split second be completely serious and absolutely focused and getting on with her job.
The thing I find so fascinating, this control, amazing control she had, and her ability to keep an absolute consistency to all her performances. It didn't matter how many hundred Sleeping Beauties or Giselles went by. She never fell below this particular standard of excellence. Because most of us, we're all human, and there are some days when perhaps you hit a really high point, but there are other days when you are going to be a little bit below and you know it and you mind terribly. But it was this consistency of performance so that everybody who saw her, I would have thought over 30 years, saw a really good performance.
I was first asked to partner Margot when I was 19, and I was quite terrified to be supporting the greatest ballerina in the world. It was, to say the least, rather awesome. And there was one lift at the end of the main pas de deux where she's at arm's length above my head. horizontal to the ground, and I have to run round the stage and slide her down the body, and then the pas de deux finishes. And Margot, in her enthusiasm on the first night, did a tiny extra wriggle when she was above my head, and unfortunately fell out of both my hands and landed really heavily on the stage. I was devastated. The audience, I think most of them had stood up in disbelief. And I was ready to get back onto the next plane to London. And Margot was wonderful. She giggled and laughed. I didn't.
Simplify, simplify, simplify. It doesn't mean to say that there isn't huge technical resource suggesting the simplification, but she wanted everything to be clean and neat and clear. She hated fuss, she hated trimmings. She wanted the absolute essence of a thing. It became rather like Chinese art, that the hand hovers and hovers and hovers, and then there's one stroke, but the one stroke is the perfect stroke.
She danced for the purity of dance and the wonderful musicality. I mean, some dancers, beautiful dancers, I won't name them, but I could name several that are not at all musical. But Margot was unbelievable. For you'd hear dee-dum-dum, and you'd think she's not going to get there, and absolutely on the note, boom.
Everybody was waiting for her to make her first entrance, and this fabulous smile would come on, and she'd warm the whole theatre, not just the stage, the whole theatre. You would feel all's well with the world somehow. But what struck me about her was this woman dancing, and not just, a dancer, a female dancer. She was this real woman, which I haven't seen in anybody else, really.
She couldn't get into an ugly position, you see, even if she didn't do what was completely accurate, which of course she did. But if she didn't, it wouldn't matter, because whatever she did looked perfect. Her dark, jet black hair, her huge almond eyes, she always wore bright red lipstick. She radiated happiness, something hard for people to understand nowadays, but honestly, when she came on the stage, the kilowatts went up. Really, they did.
If a principal walked down the corridor of our studios when we were in the school or in the company, you stood back, and with the rosin box in the wings, you cleared if Fonteyn was heading to the rosin. Huge respect and a bit of fear, because you waited till you were spoken to. It was royalty, really. It was a star performance. You couldn't fault her, from the way she looked in rehearsals, perfectly turned out, to the glamour at the end of the show, or in any way she handled herself. So it was a wonderful sort of example for all of us.
The technique had brilliant moments. The young dancers looking at it, they probably wouldn't be able to spot it because it was so amazingly disguised. She had the most perfect proportions, and the strain of the body was evenly distributed. That sounds terribly technical, but it was one of the things that kept her almost injury-free through the career. It was beautiful training and a very, very sound technique and a correct way of working that perhaps isn't easily detected. The brilliance came in the understatement.
When I was in my 30s, thought the technique was it. This is what dancing was about. This is what we train to do every day of our lives, to make our technique as beautiful as possible. But Margot taught us that it's not that, it's not technique. Of course, you have to have a technique to dance. She had the most extraordinary way of telling a story, of making it real from the beginning to the end, so you believed absolutely everything she was doing. Now, there's no arty-farty stuff, there's nothing stitched on from the outside, it actually came from inside her. The amazing ability to reach people, to come across the footlights and actually feel you, person sitting in the audience, she was actually dancing for you and was able to bring you in.
All the regality and grace and a kind of youth, a kind of spring in her step. And of course, you remember It was a kind of... Well, you remember the first aurora, you know, that wonderful pose at the beginning of entrance. Go on.
She felt trapped in the expectations of all these other people, and she was a soul who actually tried to please. She always felt inadequate, she always wanted to do better, and so gradually all these pressures built up from all points of the compass, and I think it actually split her personality. Every hour of the day in Margot's life, there were 7 people wanting something of her. And they would want it then, that afternoon. There would be messages stacking up saying, would you do this, would you do that? Oh, I haven't got seats for this. You promised that you'd do this for my niece. I mean, she had a very passing acquaintanceship with what might be termed as normal life. She'd been treated as something odd, special, and in many cases controlled from a very early age. She had the expectation of her mother, Ninette de Valois. She had the expectation of Frederick Ashton. What was in it for them? I don't think that she ever really got free of that crushing burden. And I don't think she knew for a minute why she carried it. She was a driven creature. But anyone with a stroke of genius is a driven creature. These people are sacrificed. They really are sacrificial victims. They're put on the stone and they're pulverized.
These are a present for my birthday. They are a pair of point shoes owned by Margot Fonteyn. I'm a big fan of Margot Fonteyn, and my friend bought them for me as a lovely birthday present. Sort of studied Margot Fonteyn and her story of sort of dancing in the face of adversity, I suppose, with her bad feet, Dancers often spend quite a long time cutting them so that they can be worn, but she seems to have cut all the inner soles out of them, which I know a lot of dancers do when they supposedly have bad feet, to pronounce the arch when they're standing up on point in them. And it seems that she stripped out layers of the insole here. And in these shoes, she was married, murdered, and declared mental, all in a day's work, of course.
It was better than fiction at London Airport. Back only 2 days after release from Panama City Jail, Dame Margot Fonteyn came home. Self-possessed as though she were taking a bow, the great ballerina prepared to face another ordeal. Now, see how to deal with the press. To every question, say, I won't answer that.
I would rather not talk about it at all.
I think that is my first question.
That's what you're trying to say. Did I know about it before? Well, I'm not answering that question.
Did you know that your husband knew about it?
I'm not answering that question either.
Did you carry a gun in Panama?
I won't answer that question either, because you can guess whether I carried a gun.
In newspapers and cartoons, you've been dubbed almost a sort of gun-toting revolutionary.
I can't help what newspapers and cartoons do.
No, that would be completely unfair to think that you've even got any knowledge of anything about this revolution at all.
What are you trying to get me to say exactly? Why don't you tell me what it is you want me to say? And I'll tell you if I'll say it or not. Because you're fishing around something and I can't quite get the gist of it.
I think very simply,
yes,
what gave rise to all these reports?
I presume that something has happened in Panama in the last 10 days.
You were in jail, Dame Margot.
Among other things, I was in jail.
Did you carry a gun?
About all those things, I am not going to say anything.
I remember her saying, "The God, beautiful day," and she said it pretty grimly, savagely. She said that she had to go and do another tour in Australia. That's it. And I said, "Oh, God, you can't do it. It's too exhausting. You can't do another immediately after whatever America." And then she looked at me in that little beady, "Guns don't come cheap," she said to me like that. Little savage look. That's the only time she's ever, to me, I suppose I might remember, I think the only time she ever revealed that she'd paid for it all.
She said that they were in Panama, and suddenly the police came, and Tito said to her, "Sit on the chest." So she sat on the chest and prattled, made conversation, was perfectly charming. And then when they're gone, she said, "Why do I have to sit on it? It's quite uncomfortable." He said, "Open it." She opened it. It was full of hand grenades.
The revolutionary tendencies in Margot Fonteyn were extreme to the point of lunacy. I actually, at one period, was heavily involved because she used to take me off to meetings with Geneva-based arms manufacturer, Dr. W, and we got stuck in a very strange meeting place in North London on a very, very foggy evening. I mean, stupid paperbacks with thriller covers are not in it. And we had this meeting with the good doctor who was thinking that he was going to sell her several million US dollars worth of armaments. And at some point when this was going on, to my mounting horror, I realized that she was pretending all this was absolutely real and her feet appeared to be still on the ground. She had to go off to a nearby cafe to take a call from somewhere or other, possibly a bank manager saying, "Are you mad?" However, she decided she'd get more of a hearing from her scatty stepson. After all, she knew his propensity for cooking up financial deals because God knows that he'd cooked up enough when he was still at school. And so he took over the running and said, well, Margot, we can do this, we can do that, we can do the other. Anyway, I think it's safe to say that on that particular time, I mean, she ended up with a small suitcase full of automatic weaponry. But it probably only took her a few performances to pay that lot off. But if we'd been stuck with the good doctor, she'd have been dancing till she was 150.
It was in Cambridge in 1937 that I fell suddenly and instantly in love. Our little company used to dance every year in May in the university town of Cambridge, which coincided with the undergraduates' final examinations. But in spite of that, they somehow managed to entertain us in an almost continuous floating party. One evening, I returned to find that the party had settled temporarily in our rooms. Two dark-haired young men were dancing. They were dancing the rumba, which at that time was practically unknown in England. I was fascinated by the younger of the two men. I found out that his name was Tito.
The party line was that she met Tito, Cambridge, absolutely fell for each other, had to be partied. Then he reappeared in her life, and she never looked at anyone before or since. And all, that was the party line. And she stuck to it to her dying day. And when Tito came along for the second time, of course, she totally exaggerated it. She'd never thought about anybody but Tito since they met at Cambridge, and all that absolutely complete bunkum. I should think she hardly remembered him.
He was dashing. Then he reappears. He calls her in Atlanta. Then he vanishes again, you know. So he isn't there for her. But he's up there in her head, obviously, in some way. Then he reappears yet again at the Met, backstage, and the next day he says, we're going to get married. Well, first of all, that's highly romantic. Second of all, she was ready to be married. Third of all, it's not so bad to be introduced to a world of Onassis and Winston Churchill and all those horrible fascist leaders whom Arias was drawn to and would have been one had he ever really come to control Panama. She had a South American connection with her Brazilian ancestry, so that wasn't alien. Mary was. And he assures her that his wife won't in the least mind divorcing him, because Margot could not allow herself to see herself as a homebreaker. Well, and the more you know about Arias, the less he was a home person. You couldn't break his home. What was it?
We were married in Paris in February 1955 at the Panamanian consulate. The office was extremely small, packed with people. My parents even couldn't get near to us. It was an awful
It
place.
was a real scrum. Absolute pandemonium. There's so many people you could hardly get in the door. There was Margot, all in white, dressed by Dior people.
I think the relationship with Tito was something that was totally manufactured in Margot's head. Margot did say once that she'd been bullied into the whole idea of marriage. She had so many people pointedly saying, my dear, you're becoming rather distant. You'll end up as middle-aged and arid. And she would try and stem all this, as she saw it, interference in her private life by saying, very well, I'll get married when I'm 35. And it's an incredible chance that Tito Arias suddenly appeared in her dressing room when she was something like 34 3/4. And it took her a long while to be persuaded that this was anything other than a complete folly. I mean, that's what she saw it as the time. She didn't think that he'd kept his figure very well, and that she knew that he was a philanderer, and not least that he was a married man with 3 children. Why should she get involved with all of that? But gradually, it became part of the mantra, well, I've got to get married at 35 because I've said I'm going to, and therefore it might as well be this one. And then she kind of reinvented the whole romance of her meeting in Cambridge when she was 18, but in fact he stood her up in Cambridge.
But afterwards we had a beautiful reception and we went off for our honeymoon in the Bahamas.
She's the epitome of everybody thinks is a ballet star, and her life was horrendous. She worked hard all her life, and he was taking all her money. She didn't mind going out in little boats and smuggling guns. It was a mad situation, not mad, tragic situation, really. Whenever we were travelling, and Tito used to promise to come and join the tours with us and everything, and he never did, you know. I mean, once he did. But Margot and I were sunbathing on the beach at one point, and he was mostly in the water. And then he came out, and in front of me, you know, she actually pleaded seriously with him to go to bed with her in the afternoon, because afternoon was the time they rested and danced at night, you know. And not a bit of it. He was having too much fun in the water, thank you very much. He didn't give a damn. And she was on the phone to him all the time and pleading with him. He had no reason not to join the tour. 3/4 of the time we were on tour. And he might turn up just once and say he was going to stay a week, and then he'd find somewhere to go like Monte Carlo and gamble instead.
She had a huge bouquet, I'm sure somebody said with this, of dark red roses arrived at every performance. And it was from Tito. But Tito sent Margot the bill. So she was paying these flaming roses.
He was what is called an international lawyer. I don't know what that means, but that's what he was supposed to be. And so I suppose he spent his time internationally. He used to know all the John Wayne and all these people. I believe he used to work for them.
Well, Tito I first met when he came on a set of a picture that we were making called, God, what was the name of the picture? I can't remember the name of the picture. He was about 12 years old, and he and his mother were visiting up here from Panama, and his father was then president. I've known Tito to be a most brilliant young man. He's the most objective thinking fellow that I ever met. He can look at any situation without emotion, which is so hard for a lot of us to do.
I think it was when they danced for Princess Grace's wedding in Monte Carlo. And Tito was there, and he went into this room, and there was all these sheets and sheets of stamps with Princess Grace on the little stamps. And he just went and collected a whole load of them and started handing them out. But it was typical of Tito, you know, he just, well, he stole them, really, didn't he?
We went on honeymoon. Tito had a yacht, and we sailed around the Bahamas for 2 weeks. And on our return to London, Tito arrived as ambassador for Panama to the court of St. James's. Tito was ambassador for 3 years.
Margot really had a very poor deal on the diplomatic core business. When Tito was ambassador, I once asked about this, and his uncle was a dictator at the time. And I said, I think I'd asked who was the previous ambassador. She said, oh no, Tito was the first ambassador. He decided when he married me, he wanted to be the ambassador. So his uncle was the dictator, so he fixed it. I think she said the president. I don't think they would call themselves dictators. Margot bought the embassy in Turlow Place, paid for furnishings and the upkeep, and all the staff took her to the cleaners, because of course she knew nothing about domestic life.
He wanted his wife up on the stage dancing. That was the whole point of it. It was his wife being on that stage with that acclaim that got very important people into his box in the opera house, and that was what he was interested in. He wasn't interested in what was going on the stage. He was interested in the people who were sitting in the box beside him. And so therefore there was no question that he was going to ask his wife to stop dancing, because the raison d'etre of his business was that she was dancing.
And Tito allowed her to go on with her profession completely. And that, for a Latin man, is almost unheard of. It's heard of now, but at that generation, it was almost unheard of. And to run around the world by herself, That was almost unheard of at that time.
But during that time, Tito was plotting his revolution. And at the end of 3 years, he resigned as ambassador because he was making a revolution. Really, it was against the chief of police more than against the government of the time. And it was quite an exciting event.
We boarded a little launch called the Nola, and we went out to sea, meeting up with a shrimp boat. Some of the arms had arrived in Panama in the false bottom of a little dinghy. And this dinghy, due to the weight of the arms, sank. A splendid captain said, "Oh, I don't mind sharks at all," and he dived in and he got the thing up and they broke open the bottom and they unpacked all these guns and ammunitions and things which are stacked all around on the deck. And very early, a plane circled round. Well, that was the police, and they had discovered us. And I said, "What'll happen if you come back to Panama?" He said, "I'll be arrested." And Tito clambered aboard the shrimp boat, and in what seemed no time at all, this little thing was a speck in the distance. Tito had said, we were to go back to Panama as a decoy.
When she went off in the boat, and Tito went off in one direction, brave as a lion, I don't think, immediately they were caught, leaving Margot in the little boat. And the boatman gave an interview, the boatman in Panama somewhere, and said, oh, the lady he had to row was crying the entire way back to Panama. And Black Queen said she was terribly upset to read that interview, that Margot had been in tears the whole time. Margot never told anybody. The boatman said it. He said, oh, the lady, how she was crying the whole way back, crying. So poor Margot.
And when she got back to Panama, she was arrested and she went to jail. The governor sent her roses from his garden. When we went to film the prison, as dusk approached, vultures were flapping over the jail. It seemed so appropriate. And finally, we were allowed in, and there was this superintendent, sort of Scarpia figure, and all the prisoners were looking out and waving to us and shouting at us. We saw the place where she had been charged, and we saw where she had been imprisoned. But that was an extraordinary, it was a terrible jail.
Finally, they did ask me these questions. I said as little as I could about who any of the other people were. And then they took me a bit later into a car, straight from jail into a car, and out. I was deported. doctors said that a bullet had lodged against his spine, and they couldn't be sure whether this might cause paralysis. And after 3 days, when the doctor was making an examination of him, I saw that he shook his head. Most likely, this spinal injury would be for life.
Sure he was shot because he was having an affair with a man's wife. Why else? I think everybody knows that now. I think the Panamanians slightly don't pretend it's not true. But of course he was having an affair with a wife. Margot had been trying to ring him frantically, but she could not find him. She didn't know where he was. The answer is he got off into the mountains with the wife. And he descended from the mountains, came down. I don't think, somebody says the wife was in the car. That I don't know, but I rather doubt. But certainly he came down and stopped the traffic lights, and the husband was waiting. Boom, boom. That was that.
At first, we were told by a doctor that my father didn't want to see us because, they said, he felt that he couldn't see us, covered in blood and without his daily shave.
There were so many people there. There's such confusion. There was a line for giving blood. The line went around the corner. We could hardly get into the emergency. They took us in another way. And then we get there, and it's pandemonium, women screaming, men. I didn't think he was going to die. You know, you always think your father is a Superman. It never occurred to me that he was never going to be able to speak to me comfortably or hug me or walk again.
We had political enemies, and we had personal friends that were political enemies, and we knew things about people, and we sorted that out. That was part of our life, and we grew in that, and Tito had grown with that. But to Margot, that was an entirely different way of seeing things.
I said to Roberta, what happened to the man who shot your father? And he said, oh, he's fine. I saw him the other day. So I said, didn't he go to prison? And he said, no. And I said, why? And waited and waited. And then he said, in Panama, there are things that we understand.
When Tito got shot, it was bad timing. Well, I know it was bad timing because when we were in Rome and he was supposed to turn up, it was to discuss divorce. That I know. And he just didn't turn up, and he'd been shot, so there it was. Finish. That was the end of the story. It was over. And I suppose she felt she couldn't leave him in that way.
That she had decided at that stage, no, this was not going to go on. Was it Mr. Ballerina who shot him 5 times? What expensive 5 bullets those were in terms of twisting her life totally. But I mean, the fact of the matter is the marriage was over.
As soon as possible, the doctors in Panama thought it best to send him to the best rehabilitation hospital, which is in England at Stoke Mandeville.
Fonteyn being Fonteyn, or if you want to say it, Peggy Hookham being Peggy Hookham, she was not going to walk away from a husband who was turned into a quadriplegic. There is another level. Once he was a quadriplegic, he was in her hands. The control had shifted. There wasn't going to be a lot of hanky and panky from then on. It's horrible to say, but if she was going to have him, she had him where she wanted him.
Margot needed to be needed. That was her raison d'etre. She was loyal, loving, glorious friend, but she needed to be needed, and Tito never needed her until those bullets went in his body. Now he really needed her. That would not be the time to walk away from Tito. I mean, she couldn't divorce Tito then, because that thing that flourishes in her was being used.
When I said how amusing Tito was and what a pity that people didn't talk to him. She said, yes. And rather wistfully, she said, of course, it's nice for me because it means he bothers with me now. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, when we were married and we were living in London and he was the ambassador, days would pass on end when he wouldn't talk to me except to tell me who someone was, because he thought I was stupid.
His secretary, Marlene Worthington, who was with him and has remained with him from when he was first shot and was in the hospital in Panama, has been a tremendous influence in his recovery.
Tito had this little secretary, Marlena, she was called. And I once went to Grosvenor House, a good place for Tito. Margot took his flat. It must have been so expensive for her, poor thing. That's why she had to carry on dancing. And I went up, and she said, Tito's run away with Marlena. He was paralysed to the neck. You must admit he was quite something. I said, how could you? She said they left me a note.
The other sad thing was that Margot never really understood what he was saying. You know, after he was shot and when he came out of his coma, he couldn't speak properly, so it was very garbled. When he was still at Stoke Mandeville, and she was really spending her life down there then. She was spending nights down there and getting up at God knows what hour and insisted on feeding his breakfast to him and then catching an early train to be in class by 9:30 in Telgarth Road. I mean, I didn't know how she did it. And then after performances, she'd eat a sandwich and get on the train and go back there. Said she was there to feed him in the morning.
She learned to drive at that time so that she could get herself from the hospital to the railway station and then on the train up to London, coming into work at Barons Court to the rehearsal studios, looking very tired, knowing that she danced the night before. She never missed class, she was always there. One was very aware, again, of this fantastic focus, that however terrible she must be feeling, she focused on what she had to do and to get through class. She never left class early. She would stay right to the end. And then if she was rehearsing, she'd rehearse full out.
I rang Margot and I said, there's a guy called John Merry wants to come and see me, and he sounds a bit, iffy, so do you mind coming round and being with me? So she came round and he'd said to me, I'll ring your doorbell 3 times and please don't answer the door to anyone else. It was like being in a James Bond movie, absolutely petrifying. And it all amounted to virtually nothing, it was just crazy. I think he was just conning us. But as he was leaving, Margot said, do you ever do mercenary work? I thought, here we go. She's going to start doing silly things again. And she did get him to go there. And I think it was to get rid of somebody who was threatening Tito. And when he came and demanded thousands of pounds from her for having gone to Panama and not done what he was supposed to do, which was shoot someone, I mean, it's just sort of wild, isn't it? That this woman would want to employ a mercenary who she'd never met before to go and kill somebody. Virtually go and kill somebody. And then he came back not having killed him and wanted £2,500. Which wasn't, now you think £2,500 is not much, but for her it was everything. And he threatened her for ages. And, she looked after Roberto when he was a boy going to school, when he was 12 or 13, something like that. He was living with BQ, Margot's mother. He was a monster. When he was 12, he was a monster. He'd steal the coat off your back if you'd put it down somewhere, he was terrible.
Well, he was in prison here. Well, he was in prison everywhere. He'd been in practically every prison in South America. And you see, when he was in London, he had the same name, exactly the same name, as his father. And he would go to all these nightclubs and so on and use Tito's name and run up tremendous bills. And of course they'd send them on to Tito, which meant Margot. He was being held in Pentonville for fraud. Then he'd ask for books, and then eventually he asked for money. I said, why do you want money? You can't have money in prison. Oh, well, I've told this man that you will give him £200. And I said, I haven't got £200. I'm not giving him any money. And sure enough, all my jewellery went the next week. He even stole from BQ. He stole from me. He stole from everybody if he could. If you left anything lying about.
He used to run away and he'd disappear for days, and we'd all go out searching. We used to walk the streets at night looking for this kid. And I used to say, when we find him, let's kill him, you know.
BQ comes lumbering out of the kitchen saying, that little bastard, that little bastard. And the little bastard had left a very spiffing-looking briefcase sitting right in the middle of the floor, and she went right over it. She had a glass in her hand. She'd already been tanked up on gin in the kitchen. I thought, has she broken it? I mean, what absolute chaos. And still Margot didn't come back. And apparently she was kind of seen by people running along the Baron's Court platform, banging on the windows saying, come back, Robertita, come back. And she's running, she's trying to catch up with the train because the little devil had got on the train and gone. And she's running along in her carpet slippers, banging on the windows. And there are two ballet students going, Dame Margot's just pounded up the street in woolly carpet slippers. I mean, this is not a sane way to conduct domestic life.
This is a letter written by my father to Margot on January 1955. It is addressed to Mujer de mi vida, which is Spanish for woman of my life. He wrote, "Do not despair, my dear child. Do not be so terribly sad. For in the quality of your sadness is the same exquisite sensitiveness that makes you so immeasurably lovable. When I was the young boy who kissed you with trembling lips and tightly shut eyes, I was crushed by what I believed to be then insurmountable odds, lack of confidence in myself, sense of insecurity, geography, careers, and financial considerations. This letter seems to be more for me than for you. Yes, it is a need to confess that I have not recently allowed my better nature to guide my love. Unfortunately, I do not always act as I write. But today, my better nature needs to dialogue with you without recoursing to shallow heroics. But all of Tito, the gentle and the violent, the good and the bad, the relaxedly serene and the emotionally tense, loves you most dearly. That I know to be my father's style, and even though it is not the first time I read it, I find it reaches my heart in many a way, because possibly this letter states what he felt until the day of his death.
The advent of Rudolph into Margot's life was extraordinary. She tried so hard in her marriage. She was bored. So when Rudolph came on the scene, it wasn't just that he restored her as a dancer. He also came to a time when, as a woman, she was flailing. She'd felt that she would have to find another role for herself. And suddenly, here was this young man.
He didn't run away from Russia just because he wanted to get out of Russia. He wanted to find out, to know what was going on in the rest of his world, in other parts of the world.
You won't believe this, they said, but this Russian boy, Vera says, this Russian boy, I'll come if he can dance with you. She said, I've never heard anything so ridiculous in my life. I went, well, who the hell does he think he is? She wasn't very grand, but she was a bit grand, you know. And who does he think he is? I've never heard anything like it. And I said, rightly or wrongly, do you know, I would dance with him. Yes, you dance with him, actually. What the heck, you know. If he's only going to come if he dances with you, you dance with him. She said, I won't. She said, I won't. I said, you must.
Towards the end of the 50s, I remember Margot rang me once or twice, and she said, look, I think I'm beginning to come to the end of my dancing career. I don't think really I can go on much longer. But what happened with Nureyev was that he was this extraordinarily sexual, animal-like man. Margot was certainly completely bowled over by him. And this is what created this most extraordinary dance partnership and one of the greatest duos that ballet's ever seen.
I was in their first performance of Giselle, and it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience because there was a fusion and an electricity that was so tangible, you could almost hold it. And the happy part of all the peasant dancing, we're supposed to be smiling and cheesy grins and things. The tears and the makeup was just running off. Just the emotion on stage was amazing. And that performance, we had 30 curtain calls at the end. We were there for an extra 45 minutes at the end of the performance.
I think after first 2 rehearsals of Giselle, she trusted me and said, well, your interpretation is fantastic. I haven't seen anybody coming more closer to ideal. And but it is not my way, absolutely. I don't find place for myself. I don't have, somehow there is no rapport. There will be no chance to have a conversation on stage.
so I better don't do it. Or it would be unfortunate, we would have to change. And she thought for a day and then said, all right. Total involvement and total investment. She invests everything in me, and then it is thrown out into the public, rather than projecting into the public. And then it might come back, might not. But it is something what we generate between ourselves. I say it is absolutely, we're face to face. We play or we live for each other, and then it is projected into the public.
A lot of people thought, even if they didn't say so, that it would be quite a good idea if I decided to retire. I thought, he's 23, I'm 42. That's going to be like mutton dancing with lamb.
When you dance with somebody, you automatically spend a lot of your days with them because the rehearsal hours are the same, and you finish rehearsing at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you go and have lunch together because nobody else is having lunch at that time, so you do spend a lot of time together. And of course a great, great fuss was made of Nureyev when he first came, and I was rather old shoes by that time. I'd been dancing in America for, I don't know, 10 years already. And there was a lady in the Russian tea room who bore down upon him with great enthusiasm, and she talked and talked and talked at him in Russian for a long time, and I was sitting there, and suddenly she turned and looked at me and she said, "Who's that, your mother?"
It was in my hearing that Rudolph decided to taunt Margot one day. It just happened in a rehearsal, and he said, "Well, so you are a great ballerina? Show me."
I suddenly realised, to my slight horror, that Margot was in love with him. She suddenly talked like somebody who's in love. I thought, oh, heavens, I'm afraid you have actually fallen in love with him. That may rather lead to unhappiness. Well, what more, they were certainly behaved like it, you know, all lovey-dovey and holding hands and giggling and hugging and all that. But what more went on, that's not for me to say. I see exactly why she fell in love with him. Then she once said to me, well, you see, if I'm going to give a real performance with Rudy, I have to be slightly in love with him. She said, slightly to apologize, to justify herself, but in a sort of off-hand way, meaning, don't think that I've abandoned Tito, my love. Oh, but of course I just have to pretend to be, or have to, no, I didn't say pretend. I have to fall in love with Rudy to give the performance. Meaning, it was, yes, she did.
I also had a conversation with Rudolph about that, sitting on a plane. And he said he'd wanted to marry Margot and that she wouldn't leave Tito.
She absolutely loved him. It was, I mean, anyone who knew her at that time, you know, was happy to see that she was in love. It's what made her dancing at that time so enchanting, so wonderful, and so rejuvenated. And it made her capable, in the way that love does, it made her capable of amazing feats, things that she should have been long past. She virtually learned a new body language with him. It was a privilege to see them together. If sex happened as well, which I'm sure it probably did, it was incidental to this amazing artistic exchange.
We used to stand in the wings, and it was always like you were seeing her for the first time. She recreated every moment. I don't think I ever didn't watch those performances from the wings because I couldn't bear not to have another diet of Margot and those moments, because she just made this sort of magic, heightened emotion and created this incredible atmosphere. And she would look at you with eyes absolutely brimming with tears. It was a combination of Marguerite and Margot, and I think one couldn't distinguish what it was, but you were drawn into the power of their performance. So it gave you goosebumps because, I mean, she was completely living every second of it.
She had terrible arthritis in her feet. She was having injections in them when I was in the company. And Fred wrote this vehicle where her technique wasn't challenged, but he used every finite cell in her body and of Rudy's, of the very best and most powerful artistic talents that they had. And that's why I believe, I don't know if it's still true, but I believe that he actually said he didn't want anyone else. It would never be danced by anybody else.
You know, dancers get very tired and they get injuries, and you get, you know, helped along. And we had a very nice physio therapist at the time, and I went up and I just flopped onto this bench waiting for my turn. And I suddenly realized that there was somebody on one next to me, but we were head to toe. And I looked at the feet and I went, oh my God, whose feet are those? And Margot sat up and said, they're mine. That's where I had my nervous breakdown. I mean, they looked a mess.
Because when you do this...
He also taught her to value money. He would insist that they were paid in cash in an envelope for the performance. And she learned from him that money could be conjured from dancing.
Where I am.
So he changed her greatly in that way.
What do I do?
When she's, what, is she actually,
No,
when she's on her own, you mean?
When you go across,
yes.
now she goes balance.
What does he do when I do balance and he goes, he crosses behind the I think you have a position.
Well, I have position there, but before.
Margot was used to not being paid very much, you know, because she'd been with the company during the war and everything and getting £4 and £5 or something. Whereas Rudolph was adamant, and Rudolph could demand anything when he first arrived. Could demand anything. Everybody wanted him. So he did. And he got it. Because, you know, the opera house was full every time that happened.
Which one? Oh, yes.
Cash when we were on tours was a definite must, and I usually carried the money in a bag that got bigger and bigger, and whenever anybody of the company that we were travelling with asked what it was, we said it was the laundry bag. It was their dance belts and things that we took home every night to put in the washing machine. And it wasn't, it was all pound notes.
Don't start too soon, huh? Because if I get nervous, if he's fine.
And so Margot, thank God that that happened, because she wouldn't have had a penny till the day she died, I don't think.
Don't get too near, yes. Don't get too affectionate.
She was never good at being on her own. Never. The fact that Rudolph always wanted to be on the go, and he wanted to see everything that went on. He wanted to see all the shows on in the theatre and movies and things. She was a bit the same, and the three of us used to run from one theatre to another. I mean, Rudolph and I went to 3 plays in one night. We saw one act, went to the next one and saw another act, and pretended we'd seen the whole thing, you know.
She was quite a party animal too. We were in San Francisco walking one evening, and I was going out with a group of friends, my husband and I, and Margot and Rudy and Fred were walking past, and there was a big party going on, and they called down and said, come and join us, etc. And we said, no thanks. Margot and Rudy were up there like a shot. And that made headline news because they were raided, there were drugs there.
Could I take it with me? If I need.
No, we have to keep this, but if you want to copy it while you can, the number is 3191. Okay, Rudolph. Here, sign your name. Do you have anything to say about it at all?
How do you feel about it?
How did you get
I think most people
involved?
will want to know this. Will you dance this evening? Do you have any plan? They talk to us about?
Are they treating you well?
Have you arranged to make bail and get out of here?
Miss Fonteyn in a full-length ermine coat was just as uncooperative.
Will you, Mr. Nureyev, appear tonight, Miss Fonteyn?
Their manager led the dancers into hiding after their release.
Will we see you this evening, Miss Fonteyn? How about you, Rudy? Will we see you this evening on stage?
Nureyev and Fonteyn have 2 appearances scheduled for San Francisco tomorrow, one on stage, one in municipal court.
Children you are. It's only a job. Get on with it, driver. Yep, we're ready. Get on. Okay. Come on. Get on.
I had quite a small flat in Walpole Street, which happened to be just off the King's Road at the height of the excitements of flower power and hippies and all the rest of it. And Margot suddenly discovered that if she turned up at a certain time of the afternoon, there would be quite an interesting array of pale, rather silent children lined up around the walls. Presumably, a lot of pot had been inhaled somewhere up the King's Road earlier, so they'd reached the silent stage. And Margot would look at one and say, "Oh, that boy in the corner, you know, he looks really hungry." And I'd say, No, he's quite all right, don't worry." And she couldn't get it out of her mind that the reason they were looking rather still and silent was because they were hungry. So she would disappear into the kitchen, a lot of cupboards banging, the stove turning on, and after 5-7 minutes, out she would come with a tray of very presentable food that I didn't know I had in the kitchen, with a fork, and she would first feed the boy that she was particularly worried about, then she would look around the others, and back to the kitchen, brew up another lot, back again, feeding all these little birds individually, one by one, until they started to come alive and look quite interested. By the time she's gone back for the third cook-up, one of them saying, "Oh, that Margot, what a great chick." I didn't think they had a clue who she was.
It had been decided that in the next Royal Ballet season in New York, the company would open with Romeo and Juliet, not with Sleeping Beauty. Sol Hurok, the American impresario who presented the company, was uneasy about this, believing that the American audience would expect Sleeping Beauty, and suddenly they were going to be given a new ballet, Romeo and Juliet by Kenneth Macmillan. Nobody really knows who Kenneth is even. And therefore he asked if the casting could be changed to allow Fonteyn and Nureyev to appear in the opening of the New York season. And this became a very vexed question.
Kenneth Macmillan made Romeo and Juliet on Lynn Seymour, and then Lynn was shoved aside so that Margot and Rudolph danced the first nights and things like that because they brought the public in. And so it didn't help a lot of younger dancers.
I became the 5th cast, not the 2nd one, There were about 6 people doing it before me. And that was the worst bit. I could understand why Margot and Rudy should do it. There was perfect sense in it. But not that I should be demoted to the sort of last person to go on, That was the hardest thing. And I think that It was a very, very bad way to treat a youngster. To treat the three of us. I think that there should have been some consultation, explanation, etc., 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 to sweeten the pill a little bit. I don't think it would be acceptable now.
Nobody admired Lynn more than Margot. She adored Lynn and adored everything that she could bring to ballet as a newer generation. The fact of the matter is that there was huge financial pressure behind the scenes, that the administration of Hurock in America was totally uncertain that this could or would work. And they were absolutely insistent that Margot should do the opening of Romeo and Juliet and appear in the first night in New York. Otherwise, they were not going to subsidize the tour.
Kenneth never really liked her in the role. Much too old for it and wrong for it at that point. And I think Kenneth felt very strongly that the people that he was wanting to bring on in the sort of way that he felt ballet was developing were not getting the chance, and therefore he was not able to develop it in the way that he wanted it to go.
Margot actually took me to a meeting with Hurock in New York. She tried and tried and tried to say, no, 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 it's all right, you can present all the others. I can come into the ballet late. I'll go in as fourth or fifth cast. He was not having any of that at all. And I thought, actually, that when we left that luncheon, I knew he had severe indigestion. And I also thought that she had won her case, and yet by the time we got on a plane and went to London, he'd already been on the phone saying, that's it, decision made, either she does it or the tour's off.
I mean, you don't get to her level if you're not insatiably ambitious. You have to be greedy to become a supreme ballerina. But that's not a bad thing. You know, Margot didn't do any of the terrible things that other ballerinas have done. Ground glass in the toe shoe. I mean, this was not her nature. She was generous. People loved her when she was young. She was a part of the company. She never insisted on precedence. She was modest. She traveled the way they all did. She didn't want special treatment. But when it came down to it, I certainly don't think she plotted or planned or deliberately did something wicked. But I think the opportunity was so great, and the pressure on her undoubtedly was so great, that she, how do you want to put it, caved in, gave in, acceded, allowed it to happen. You can shade that any way you want. The fact is, it happened.
The Fonteyn-Nureyev partnership made ballet into something so special that this phenomenon created by both of them, when you don't really see that anymore. People would go and wait for days to get a standing seat, to be able to see them dance. And in New York, like everywhere, she would arrive and she had so many people who would be just devoted to her.
When Margot came back to do, I think it was her last performance of Juliet, and she must have been by then in her late 50s. She was having a lot of difficulties with her feet and everything, but when she came on the stage, I couldn't believe it was her. She looked about 16. She looked a young girl. The way she, of course, made herself up, her hair and everything. And at the end of the performance, Dame Ninette went round, and she rushed up to Margot and said, I cannot believe what I'm seeing. You look like you were when you first joined the company. The whole performance was so moving and so wonderful, and she looked so young. She had this ability of eternal youth.
More than any other performing artist, dancers are being themselves. They're being themselves as someone else, but they are essentially being themselves. They have very little to hide from, very little to hide behind. They have the choreography, but the choreography doesn't shield them very much. I went to see Fonteyn and I saw Juliet. Fantastic. But the special skill was you went to see Fonteyn, and not only did you see Juliet, but you also saw Fonteyn.
Never thought Margot would get off the stage. I mean, there was a whole generation that suffered. And not to mention the men that ruined their lives with the coming of Rudolph, who revolutionized the whole thing. But it was to the exclusion, almost, of any other man who was not able to hold a candle to this creature. There were wonderful dancers around in the early days, and also the late. There was Antoinette Sibley and Anthony Dowell. And Rudolph just annihilated him, just out of the radar. I mean, it must have been really, really horribly difficult for our men and for our women. Everybody got pushed back almost a generation.
It's not jealousy, but when your time comes, you know it's a very short career, or normally it is a very short career. And when you're blossoming, you long for those occasions, in that a first night to somebody like us, my generation, would mean everything, because that's the night that everyone would come to. It was like the first night in New York, the last night in New York, a big opening in London. My generation learnt so much from them and their hard work, and it was so wonderful to see Rudolph as well, and Margot. But Anthony and I know it's the same for other people, we would get one Swan Lake a year in London, one.
And she came in the auditorium and walked across the stage to Rudy. We were all hanging on to a bit of scenery, warming up before the rehearsal. She came and she whispered something to him, and I have never, ever seen him explode like that ever. It was terrifying. It really was terrifying. She told him that she had just had a miscarriage. And Margot was 45 then. I know that Rudy would have loved children. He really would have loved children. So maybe it was their child. I don't know, but I've never seen such an explosion ever. The atmosphere was just horrendous. This is a woman who perhaps was told that she could never have a child for medical reasons, and then suddenly something happens and she's pregnant. It's like a rebirth of saying, I'm a full woman again. And I think that Margot really became a full woman with Rudy's influence on her. Sad they didn't have children.
The Arias family tend to be more often in opposition than on the government side. Especially Tito, he wanted to have some influence in politics, and in order to do this in Panama, it's really almost essential to be a deputy in the National Assembly because deputies have immunity from arrest. So he ran for deputy, and he was elected by a very big vote.
Tito had been shot at the end of an election campaign, and as anyone in politics knows very well, campaigns clean everybody right out of money, so that obviously wasn't a time when I could even consider dropping my career.
He was a very soft man, he was like a half-filled balloon. He had these hands, she'd never done a day's work in their life. She had this terrible, she used to go to bed with him sort of fully clothed so she could wake up every 3 hours and turn him, and she was a slight creature, as you know, and he was a big dead weight. If that wasn't killing her, just that, the business of getting up and heaving this body around for 25 years. I mean, imagine it, just imagine it. And occasionally I would be involved in fitting the thing on his penis and making sure the wire went that way and not the other way and all the rest of it. And I used to think, my God, she's doing this every night. Horrendous. I mean, even in the Grosvenor Hotel, she'd come back from a performance, no chance to get any food herself. She's busy at the billing, making proper late-night supper, steak and whatever, and then she's busy feeding Tito, so of course her bit is getting cold, and I'm sitting there wolfing my bit down, thinking, thank God for this. Tito's munching away, and she's just got a bit of cold steak lying on the plate, and I mean, I don't suppose she'd had breakfast either. And she'd just done Sleeping Beauty for 2,500 people. She knew exactly that she was being used always for financial reasons and not for artistic reasons. She brings in more money. You've also got somebody who is absolutely stuck with no financial resources behind the scenes. And she has a husband's family who, one way or another, are treating her like a cow with 3 udders and milking constantly. Basically, this is an extraordinary penalty for some woman who is of quite frail constitution, 5'4" high, and doing as much work as she can possibly do in 24 hours. It's tough.
And I say to her, to them, to both of them, why don't you buy a farm? In a farm, you can build as many houses as you want. And she said, well, and they both, apparently they start to think about the possibility of buy a farm. Some friend of Dr. Arias came to him and said, if you want to buy a farm, there is a farm for sale about an hour and a quarter from here. So he came with me to the farm. When Dame Margot called, he said to her, Margot, I have a farm, nice farm. I want we should buy this farm.
Well, I'd heard so much about it before I went. And she said, it's just a shack, it's not finished, it's this, it's that. It did have a corrugated iron roof, and it was a bit tumble down. It wasn't the way I really imagined it.
The farm had no electricity and no phone line. They had an electrical plant for the farm, and sometimes because it was a weekend or because if the plant, anything happened to the plant, they were without electricity altogether.
There was nothing here. There was absolutely nothing. In this area, there was, in fact, a little behind me, there was a little hut made of mud. Without a roof, it had fallen, but that was all there was. No amenities at all. I mean, no amenities to the point there wasn't even a hygienic facility. They had to travel back and forth to a house they had rented 15 kilometers away. The first thing they did was set up 4 columns and a tiny little roof made of leaves.
The farm was not producing much income and was becoming increasingly dependent on what Margot could produce because Tito wasn't able to earn anything. And it got very serious during the 80s, and more than once Margot would ring me from Panama to say that she was really in desperate straits. And was there anything I could do to help her?
There were many, many people who would have loved to have helped her. But unfortunately, they felt that any money that they gave to her would be given to Tito to spend on his cattle for his farm. And Tito only liked the best, and the cattle are very, very expensive. And so they were very reluctant to give money to her, but I was asked to take £2,000 or £3,000 in cash. And I met someone I didn't know at Heathrow Airport. I felt really rather James Bondish. And this money was passed over to me. And I was afraid to carry, and warned, in fact, not to let the customs see it in Panama, because they sometimes weren't paid for 3 or 4 months at a time. It was the Nureyev regime at that point. So I concealed it about my person, which on the long journey became a bit of a problem. Anyway, I was met by Tito's man Friday Ventura. He had booked a room at a hotel so that the money could be paid over in secrecy.
There was a newspaper from Japan, say Margot Fonteyn in a jungle in Panama. There was a cow that grows inside of the house, and they fed him with the milk, every day. And he was able to go from the kitchen to the bedroom. Sometimes he used to wake up, hi, Solito, how are you? Solito was the name of the bull. Then it became a bull, And he was there seeing her, and she used to touch him. How can you imagine that somebody is not going to be happy doing those kind of things,
I mean, it was worse than poor. It was almost desperation. Unfortunately, she had no pension. She never had either a manager or an agent, and she used to negotiate herself. She knew nothing about business and couldn't really say no when Tito wanted to buy some more cattle. Always had to be the best.
She was the one, of course, who kept track of which cattle was born and which died by name. Each one of them had a name, and they referred to them as a name by their name. And I just wonder, having a couple of hundred heads of cattle, how could they know which was what? I mean, I have a hard time remembering people's names, much less cattle's names.
I guess it was part of what she had to do to endure it, was that how she loved to be in Panama with the cows and the sheep and the, you know, and the cows come inside and it's so, I mean, you know, and people that have been to Panama talk about the sort of livestock that creeps and crawls around and snakes and God only knows. And here she was saying just how just wonderful it was to have the cow in the kitchen when they're having, I mean, just, it was like, oh my God. And she, you know, and she talked about that all the time. Oh no, I have to get back because there's a cow coming into season or something and want to be there for the, and she's totally, you know, another person. And I don't know how much that was genuine. You know, from Dior suits and you know, seams up the back of her legs, and to Elizabeth Arden dyed hair. I mean, from that, she went to this farmhand.
Frederick Ashton choreographed a new dance for me in tribute to my 60th birthday, in which I remember snatches of many of the ballets that he created for me in the past, and he will join me in the last few bars on the stage.
Choreography just seemed to sort of pour out of him like that. He would come to the rehearsal looking a bit worried, and I had an idea in my head. And it would just pour out, these steps, this everything. It seemed to flow so easily, and always so, so delightful. Everything in his choreography was something that everybody could enjoy.
Sometimes when I danced with her, I felt that she really didn't want to. I remember once I said, "Oh, Margot, it's packed out there. They've all come." She said, "Darling, they've come to see a freak." I thought that was really sad, that she thought she was a freak and people would come to see this old woman still being able to dance.
She said, "Do you know, I'm really worried about my bosom." She was 67, I might say. I said, "What?" I said, "I think..." "No," she said, "this costume, everything has to be up, and I'm all down." She said. And she got there, and we got someone from the theatre with the pins and everything, and she was getting that, she was digging it up there, get it up there, and then the other side, pulling that up, getting, and then got someone, and then they got, and read it, and she looked absolutely fantastic. She got it just right with a sort of bit of cleavage showing. But do you know, in that performance, and of course the audience went wild, they all knew about Fonteyn, the company on the stage, they were in tears.
She was crippled, but Margot still could pull it out of the bag, so to speak. I don't know if you know her little giggle. Hee, very light giggle. And her smile was like that too. But she used to breathe. It was almost a fixed smile sometimes, because when she was really tight, she was breathing. but it looked as though she wasn't in pain or she was smiling.
Rudolf Nureyev returns to the Royal Opera House tonight to dance in honour of his most famous partner, Margot Fonteyn. She'll be flying from her home in Central America to London to watch the special performance staged as a benefit for her. It's 10 years since she danced with Nureyev, and tonight's performance of Romeo and Juliet will evoke their most famous roles in the ballet they turned into a legend.
She's happy in that climate. She's happy with her cows. Maybe it was empty, this glamorous world. And I think life with cows probably was more meaningful.
Then we got to the curtain call, and because they were all shouting and screaming, and she suddenly clutched me and said, "Desmond, I can't walk. I can't walk out there." She said, "You have to hold me, you have to hold me up."
She was so thin. She went so thin. Michael said, all those years that I'd partnered her, and yet walking on the stage with her at that gala, as you know, she came on in that beautiful Christian Dior dress. He said, I felt that if I touched her to help her on the stage, she'd break.
The word cancer was never mentioned. Never. We used to refer to it as the treatment that she was receiving or as the sciatic nerve problem. So it was either one or the other. But the word cancer, in that way, she was sort of facing the illness in her own way. Cancer was, already accepting death in those days. So she wasn't accepting death. She fought till the end, until one day she decided, this is it.
She said, my health insurance is running out. And I've had a letter from the insurers to say that I was the victim, obviously, of a terminal illness, and the day was shortly coming when they could no longer pay.
She was literally starving. She had no money at all. When I say no money, I mean nothing. She lived off cornflakes. They had literally, she'd nothing.
My father came to realize that he was becoming a physical problem for her. She was in pain, and she was hiding it. And after he died, life lost all sparkle for her.
Annabella was his mistress while he was married to Fonteyn. And she started a routine of moving in with Tito when Fonteyn was away, as she had to be away a lot dancing, to make the money to cover his incredible medical expenses. Fonteyn might have had a clue as to what was going on. She might have left some clothing or lipstick, makeup stuff. And the Arias family would say, oh, yeah, well, we left that there. And they would cover up for what was going on. And this went on for 25 years. She would move in and take over and become a sort of shadow wife. When he died, that very same day, when Annabella heard about it, she went in the bathroom at her home, got hold of some swimming pool cleaner, poison, swallowed it, and died in agony. So the funerals of Arias and Annabella were held on the same day. And the same people were going to Arias's funeral and then going on to Annabella's funeral, because it was all this tight circle, they all knew each other.
I do think that it might be important to ask how, at the point when Margot was dying, a posse of Panamanians turn up in the hospital room of somebody who is, after all, at that moment unconscious, with paperwork to do with the alteration of a will. And, surprise, surprise, they emerge with that will signed with an inky thumbprint. Now, you have to wonder whether Margot, weeks earlier, said, oh, gosh, I might just want to change my will at the very last minute. So maybe I should actually go and register my thumbprint.
And she appeared with about 3, 4, 5 gentlemen, I think, and another woman. And they went into Margot's, and I thought, well, it's Rosario, it's her sister-in-law, I suppose, all right. And they kept asking me, what about the farm? What has she done with the farm? And I said, and I didn't tell them, which maybe I should have said, but I thought, well, you're not supposed to tell people what's in her will. And I said, I don't know what's in her will. I said, I couldn't tell you anyway, and I don't suppose anyone will tell you till they read the will. And they went on about this, and then they went in and they made her sign. And she was out of it anyway, she didn't know what she was doing. They made her with a thumbprint to say that this is an added codicil or something, I suppose, that the farm should go, I think, to Roberto. But I know she didn't want it to go to Roberto because he used to steal all the cars and he used the thing to import drugs and things.
But I do miss him. So many things they would have been happy to see, and yet the one thing I didn't want them, either one, is to live with pain. I don't wish that on anybody.
And she made me promise that I'd get her back to Panama, because I wanted to take her back to England, but she insisted she wanted to go to Panama to be buried with Tito. And leaving the hospital and getting to the airport, Karubi was with me. She told everyone who it was. Well, this little old lady, she was minute by this time. You know, she weighed, I don't know what she weighed. And she said, cover my face if you can. And I said, well, we'll put a scarf around your neck and your head, nobody will see you. And we got her onto the plane, and then Karubi's telling this girl who she is, what's the matter with her. She's got cancer, she's taking her home. I thought, I'll kill you if you come anywhere near me. So I sat most of the time, she was in there, sort of covered up, and the people would walk up and down the plane trying to get a look at her, you see, and I was sort of sitting over her so no one could see her.
I mean, she knew that she was going to die, and she was moving her arm, you know, moving her arm like you know, like she was dancing, you know. Maybe that was her the end of her life. The end of her life was dancing, you know, moving her arm.
I was holding her hand. There's something that happens. I didn't realize, I'd never heard it before. But believe it or not, I realized when I was looking at her, and I suddenly saw her die. It happens to your eyes, apparently. And I think they call it, their eyes are blown. And I think that's what I thought. I saw the soul leaving her. And anyway, I saw it happen. And I knew she was dead. And they were all there. Then they all took the things back from her that they'd given her.
I thought I should go and see where they were both buried, because I'd been told they were buried together. And I went to this cemetery, Cemetery of Peace or something like that, and I went to the custodian, and he looked up in his book. He didn't seem to know anything about Arias and Fonteyn, and found it. Fonteyn's name was misspelled. The grave looked as though it was for the poverty-stricken. But what got me was that it was right next to a hedge, and over the hedge was a garden and a house, and you had washing blowing in the breeze almost over the grave of this magnificent ballerina. And it was as though she and he had been put there to be forgotten.
My children knew her, and she lives in all of us. I have to stop. I think that she was so much part of all of us as he was. And it's strange, I don't recognize the people in the books. I didn't recognize them in articles. They're so odd and thought out. They weren't like that. They did their best.
She knew what was required of her, and she did it with such grace, that word, and such beautiful dedication, that it became an expression of a true expression of her as a person. And I don't think that it went that hard with her. I mean, you might think that perhaps the cancer came upon her because of the unacknowledged anger that she might have felt at all that she'd been put through.
She made you feel good. She really made you feel that she cared about you, that she was fond of you, that she appreciated you as much as you did her. Well, it couldn't be true, but it was genuine.
I wonder how many people did see her dance or did not see her dance, and they're interested in knowing who she was. Who was this woman? Who was this dancer? So there are people that transcend, whatever way you pronounce it, their life on earth. They become like highlights of humanity.
The charity event, I have never understood why they should put somebody through that. I mean, if they hadn't had their pound of flesh from her over the years, by God, they got it that night. If you want to do something for somebody, why not just do it? Why not just write a check and leave it in a dead tree stump? But why make a dying woman perform like that in a dress which she'd looked so glorious and wonderful in 25 years earlier? Indeed, I can remember taking enormous pains filming her in that dress when she was having the last fitting, and to make her appear on stage for the assembled company of people who were supposed to feel that they were contributing to this woman's continued existence. I think it's disgusting. I mean, at one point it was the dress that was holding her up. But that's what they did. And even then she died surrounded by bills. In some ways, I never forgive Covent Garden for that. Never, never, never. And I know it caused her huge anguish.